Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into the misty, duck-filled rice paddies of ancient China, where the sky decides whether you eat or starve, and oddly enough, a quacking little bird might just know more about tomorrow's weather than you do. You're standing barefoot on the damp soil, the scent of wet earth rising around you as distant thunder rolls lazily across the hills. In this world, forecasting the weather isn't a convenience, it's survival. The seasons can flip on you without warning, turning tender green shoots into shriveled ghosts overnight. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this. The sun beats down with a heaviness you can taste on your tongue, but rain could come any second, soaking everything you've worked for. It's a tightrope walk with the sky as your shaky partner. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. So go ahead, drop your location in the comments. I always find it comforting to know we're sharing this sleepy journey across so many time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk along a dusty village path, the chatter of neighbors blending with the distant splash of water buffaloes cooling off in the paddies. Life here is simple but sharp-edged. Every morning you wake to the soft thump of farmers adjusting their straw hats and the creak of wooden yokes being slung across shoulders. You work because the land demands it. The elders say the soil knows your name before you do. Farming here isn't like the glossy, rolling fields you might imagine. It's a labor of constant negotiation. The rains are both your best friend and your greatest enemy. Too much rain, and your delicate rice paddies flood, the tender shoots suffocating under murky water. Too little rain, and the sun will scorch the roots until they curl and surrender. And you, trudging through all this, are caught in the middle. There's no weather app to check, no handy meteorologist giving polite warnings about possible showers later this week. Here, the sky gives you riddles, not forecasts. Historians still argue whether these early farming communities truly had any reliable system for long-term weather prediction, or if they simply lived in a state of constant, semi-hopeful improvisation. You suspect it's probably the latter, judging from the way even the most experienced elders sometimes squint at the sky and simply shrug. But then, there's a curious rhythm to the village life. You notice that not everyone consults the sky alone. Some, especially the older women, seem to watch the ducks. Yes, ducks. These plump, waddling creatures aren't just dinner. They're practically colleagues in the rice fields. They gobble up pests, stir oxygen into the water with their little paddling feet, and occasionally, if you're paying attention, they seem to know when the rain's coming. You notice one morning, as the mist clings low and the sun threatens to burn it away, that the ducks are restless. They quack more, paddle in tight circles, and flap their wings as if something unseen presses against their chests. That afternoon, the heavens open. A coincidence, you think, but then it happens again and again. It's a small thing, just a flicker in your morning routine, but soon you find yourself watching them deliberately. The other farmers laugh at first, but over time, some of them start joining you by the pond, sipping tea, pretending they're just enjoying the view, but their eyes flick towards the ducks a little too often. A fringe belief starts to spread. The ducks know, or more precisely, the ducks feel. Some say it's the pressure in the air. Some whisper that the ducks are attuned to the moods of the earth. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread belief or a quirky local tradition that simply caught on in a few scattered villages. What's clear is that for you, and the handful of early believers, the ducks are starting to become less of a poultry dinner and more of a prophetic companion. The ducks don't always give you dramatic signs. Sometimes it's the stillness that tips you off, a refusal to enter the water, a sudden huddling together, heads tucked low as if bracing for something. Other times, it's an urgent, near-comedic frenzy, like they're racing imaginary storms. You catch yourself mimicking them, flapping your arms in mock panic. The younger kids love it, trailing behind you with their own featherless wing flaps. And yet, you can't deny that these patterns, these duckish little hunches, start to prove themselves more often than not. Of course, not everyone is convinced. The village elder, who prefers his old sky-watching methods, insists the ducks are just birds, not sages. But you see the way even he starts to glance at them, just briefly, as he mutters his weather predictions. The story trickles beyond your village, passed by merchants and traveling monks. Some say it's superstition, others call it farmer's wisdom, and a few, those who always search for something to debunk, laugh it off entirely. But as you squelch through the rice paddies, the mud pulling softly at your feet, you begin to trust the ducks just a little more each day. You trudge through the thick, gummy mud of the rice paddies, the water sloshing lazily against your ankles as dragonflies dart past your head like tiny, buzzing messengers. The rice plants, delicate as they are, stand in perfect, careful rows, their green blades slicing through the morning haze. It's beautiful, sure, but it's also terrifying. The balance here is absurdly fragile. One heavy rainstorm could drown your entire crop, and a dry week could parch it into a brittle memory. You glance up at the sky. It's doing that thing again, where it looks like it might rain, but might just as easily ignore you for days. And really, you should know better by now. The sky doesn't care what you need. In ancient China, rice farming was both an art and a gamble. The farmers, like you, spent their lives in a soggy dance with water levels, always a heartbeat away from either disaster or a modest harvest. Historians agree that the rice paddies in regions like the Yangtze River Delta were marvels of ingenuity. These interconnected fields weren't just pretty. They were finely tuned systems designed to hold and drain water with a precision that would put a modern plumber to shame. But even the smartest water management can't outplay bad weather. So here you are, battling the fickleness of the clouds with nothing but intuition and maybe, just maybe, your growing trust in those prophetic ducks. The morning routine now revolves around them. You find yourself taking a little detour to the pond before starting your field work. The ducks are oddly quiet today, paddling in lazy spirals, occasionally dunking their heads as if unimpressed by your silent questioning. Does that mean clear skies? Or are they just messing with you? Your neighbor grins at you knowingly. Did the ducks approve the planting today? He teases, though he's holding his hoe a little loosely, waiting, just in case, for you to say it's a bad idea. You're no shaman, but somehow you become the duck interpreter. Historians still argue whether this practice ever crossed from rural superstition into formal agricultural calendars. Some scholars believe these duck observations were quietly folded into larger traditions, while others think they remain small, local quirks, amusing, but not officially recorded. What is recorded, though, is that ancient Chinese farmers paid obsessive attention to patterns. Insect migrations, frog songs, the bloom cycles of certain flowers. So why not ducks? As you slosh through the paddies, you remember the day Old One, the most skeptical farmer in the village, reluctantly admitted that the ducks predicted the flood better than he did. He still insists it was a fluke, but you've noticed he now passes the pond on his morning walks, pausing just a little longer than before. You're not alone in this growing habit. The farmers begin to notice little things. The ducks' resting posture, their feeding times, how they gather at certain edges of the pond before a storm. One farmer swears that when the ducks bathe with particular energy, a heavy rain follows within 2 days. Another insists that when the ducks are unusually quiet at dawn, drought is on the way. It's not scientific, not yet, but there's a rhythm, and you're starting to lean into it. One quirky tidbit you overhear from a traveling merchant stays with you. In some southern villages, farmers even tried to train the ducks by feeding them more when the weather matched their behavior, as if rewarding their predictions would somehow improve their accuracy. You chuckle at the idea, like the ducks are employees waiting for performance bonuses. But you can't help wondering, do they really know, or are you all just desperate enough to believe? There's another layer of worry creeping into your mind. What if the ducks stopped showing signs altogether? What if the patterns vanish? You imagine a morning where the pond is perfectly still, the ducks indifferent to your glances. Would you plant that day? Or would you wait for a sign that may never come? Historians still debate whether these kinds of folk practices were based on actual cause and effect, or if they were simply comforting rituals that gave farmers a sense of control in an unpredictable world. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. The ducks certainly aren't infallible. There was that one time when they seemed to predict a storm, only for the skies to remain stubbornly clear, the heat lingering like a damp blanket over the village. That memory still makes your neighbor roll his eyes and mutter, "Feathered liars." But more often than not, the ducks offer you something more valuable than certainty. They offer you confidence. Even if it's just the illusion of understanding, it changes how you face the day. You run your hands over the ripening rice stalks, their tender heads bobbing just above the shallow water. The ducks paddle nearby, occasionally giving you a sideways glance, as if wondering why you've appointed them your feathered prophets. And then there's the growing whisper that maybe, just maybe, you're onto something bigger than you realize. You start to pay closer attention, not just to the ducks, but to the ducks in every season, every mood, every ripple of change. You become something of a duck detective. You notice how they cluster when the air feels heavy and how they wander apart when a breeze is light. You catalog how their feeding patterns shift when the rain is imminent and how their feathers puff out before a cold snap. One morning, your friendly approaches you, his sandals still wet from the walk through his fields. "You see them today?" he asks, nodding toward the pond. You both stand quietly, watching the ducks as they flap their wings and waddle in hurried circles, making soft, anxious quacks. "Storm," Lee whispers almost reverently. You've seen this before. The restless pacing, the nervous splashes, the occasional half-flight where they launch themselves just a few feet across the water, only to settle again, trembling. It's not just a duck thing, it's a weather thing. You feel in the way your shirt clings to your back, the pressure in the air pressing against your ears. Historians still argue whether ancient Chinese farmers genuinely believed the ducks had predictive abilities or whether the ducks simply became part of a broader suite of weather indicators. You think about this as you watch them. Does it matter? Belief has weight, even if science comes later. Over the next few seasons, the entire village slowly leans into the practice. The elders may still consult the clouds and the almanac, but now they make time to consult the ducks too. It's almost funny how no one ever sat down to formalize this system. There are no duck manuals, no scrolls proclaiming 5 duck signs of rain. It just evolved the way stories do, a quiet, practical observation that settled into the bones of daily life. Sometimes the ducks are right. Sometimes they're wildly wrong. You recall that blistering summer when the ducks gave every sign of an approaching downpour. Agitated wing flapping, erratic swimming, frantic quacking. You all rushed to shield the newly seeded patties, bracing for the storm. But the rain never came. Days passed, the ground cracked open from the heat, and the ducks strutted around obliviously, happily preening themselves in the sunshine. It became a village joke. The ducks are having an off week, you'd say, grinning as you stomped cracked mud from your sandals. One particularly quirky story still makes you smile. Oldwin once claimed that when his favorite duck swam clockwise 3 times around the lotus patch, it meant a good harvest. It was nonsense, of course. The duck did that almost every morning, mostly because one tossed little rice grains into the pond to encourage it. But one swore by it, and soon enough, a few others did too. Little rituals like this sprouted up everywhere. One woman started counting how many times the ducks dunked their heads before breakfast, believing an even number meant a dry week. Another farmer began noting whether the ducks sat facing east or west after their morning swim. You find it oddly comforting that everyone had their own duck metric. No one could quite agree on what mattered most: the number of quacks, the speed of the paddling, or how often they flapped their wings before settling. But everyone kept watching. Historians still debate whether these duck behaviors were ever truly linked to atmospheric changes. Some argue that animals are sensitive to shifts in barometric pressure or subtle environmental cues that humans miss. Others suggest it was more about the farmers selectively remembering the times the ducks were right and conveniently forgetting the misses. Either way, you're now the unofficial village duck whisperer. Children follow you to the pond in the mornings, mimicking your careful observations, squinting at the water as though the ducks might spell out tomorrow's forecast in ripples. Your friendly teases you about starting a duck consultation booth. 1 copper coin per prediction, he laughs. Half price if the duck looks sleepy. And while you joke, there's an undeniable sense that this accidental weather system has taken root. The ducks aren't just birds anymore. They're woven into the rhythm of your planting and harvesting, the decisions you make when the sky refuses to offer clues. You start to dream about them sometimes. Strange, drifting dreams where the ducks speak in riddles or wear tiny scholar hats. You wake up chuckling, half tempted to tell Lee, but also half worried he might start charging dream interpretation fees. On particularly peaceful mornings, you sit by the pond sipping tea, watching the mist swirl around the ducks as they glide across the glassy water. The village hums softly behind you. Someone sharpening a sickle, another splitting wood, the quiet shuffle of footsteps on packed earth. It's all so gently predictable now. You watch the ducks, and the ducks watch the water, and somehow that feels like enough. The seasons keep cycling, and soon it's not just your village that's murmuring about the ducks. Word travels. It always does. A merchant passing through tells you about a neighboring village where farmers now keep their own ducks, observing them like nervous gamblers waiting for the roll of invisible dice. One morning, as you're wading through the shallows near the pond, a young man from 3 villages over approaches you. His robes are dusted with the pale dirt of long travel, and his shoes are in that awkward stage between well-worn and please retire me. He bows, introduces himself as Bao, and cuts straight to the point. You're the duck man, right? You glance at the flock bobbing lazily in the water, the soft plop of their webbed feet echoing in the quiet. I suppose I am. Bao has come to learn, not just about the ducks, but about how to read them, how to anticipate the signs, how to understand the subtle shifts in their moods. His village has suffered through erratic weather, floods when they expected drought, sunshine when they braced for rain. They're desperate for something, anything, that might offer a sliver of predictability. You hesitate. Are you really the right person to teach this? After all, you're still guessing most days, still wondering whether this is real or just an elaborate comfort. Historians still argue whether these inter-village exchanges formalized into early agricultural communities or remained as loose oral traditions. Some records hint that local farmer guilds began sharing animal-based signs, but it's unclear whether ducks were ever officially listed alongside more respected signs like wind patterns or star charts. But here's Bao waiting. You decide to show him. You spend days together by the pond, crouched low in the grass, watching the ducks with a patience you never knew you had. Bao quickly picks up the rhythms. The pre-storm fidgeting, the lazy sun-soaked gliding, the rapid head bobbing that seems to herald the first crack of thunder. You tell him about Lee's theory, that ducks who stay close to shore mean steady weather. You share Wynn's east-west seeding superstition, though you wink as you tell it, letting him know that not all signs are created equal. You even recount the peculiar fringe tidbit you'd once overheard from an elderly traveling scribe, that some farmers, far in the south, would whisper questions to the ducks before dawn, believing the direction of their first swim was a divine answer. Bao laughs, but makes a note of it anyway. One quiet afternoon, Bao asks you a question that stays with you. Do you think the ducks really know? Or do they just move, and we write stories around their paddling? You sip your tea, the steam curling into the air, and answer honestly. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the story itself is what we need. Historians still debate whether belief in these signs was a form of soft control over anxiety, a way to cope with the crushing randomness of farming life. After all, watching ducks is preferable to pacing under the looming threat of the unknown. Bao eventually returns to his village, armed with scribbled notes and the warm memory of shared stories. You hear later that his community embraces the duck-watching tradition with a fierce enthusiasm, adding their own little quirks to the practice. You start getting occasional visitors now. Curious farmers, wide-eyed children, even a skeptical herbalist who insists the ducks are responding to local plant scents, not weather. Each one brings a new layer to the tale, a new variation on the ever-growing folklore. Some suggest creating duck observation logs, carefully tracking every movement and quack. Others propose breeding ducks specifically for their weather sensitivity, a project that seems both ambitious and completely impossible. The herbalist returns one day with what he calls duck-enhancing herbs, which he claims will make their weather reading skills sharper. You laugh, so hard you nearly drop your basket of lotus roots. Your friend Lee teases you about starting a duck school. He even jokingly carved a wooden sign for you, Master of Ducks and Clouds. You hang it by the pond anyway, because why not lean into it? The ducks, of course, remain blissfully unaware of their growing fame. They paddle, they preen, they chase each other in lazy circles. They live their simple, soggy lives, occasionally tossing you a glance that feels almost conspiratorial. On days when the weather turns suddenly, when storms arrive, just as the ducks warned, you feel a quiet satisfaction. Not just because the prediction was right, but because this strange, winding journey has connected so many people through a shared curiosity. And when the ducks get it wrong, because they do often, you simply shrug, wipe the sweat from your brow, and chalk it up to the mysterious dance between nature and chance. You stopped needing perfect answers. You started enjoying the questions. You wake one misty morning to find a commotion by the pond. Villagers cluster in loose circles, whispering urgently, their gazes bouncing between the ducks and a strange contraption sitting on the damp grass. It's a box. No, more like a cage, with small wooden levers and curious strings dangling from its sides. Lee waves you over, his grin wide. A traveling scholar brought this, he says, slapping the side of the device like a proud merchant. He calls it a duck barometer. You blink, rubbing the last traces of sleep from your eyes. A what? The scholar, an earnest man named Shun, explains his invention with the kind of excitement only someone who's been on the road for too long can muster. His idea is simple. Put the duck in the cage, tether light bamboo paddles to the sides, and track the bird's pacing and quacking using weighted strings that tug gently on little pegs. The more the duck moves, the more the strings shift the weights, creating a sort of moving weather gauge. You try to picture a duck calmly accepting this responsibility. Historians still argue whether Shun's duck barometer ever genuinely worked or whether it was a glorified duck jail that only served to confuse the poor animal. Some even suggest Shun's tale might have been exaggerated, a local legend dressed up as fact. Either way, you help Shun test it. You select Ming, the calmest duck in the pond. Calm, at least, until he's placed inside the contraption. He stomps in agitated circles, tugging the strings and rattling the weights until one falls off entirely, landing in the mud with a disappointing thud. Lee doubles over laughing. Well, I think it's forecasting chaos. You spend the morning trying to convince the ducks to cooperate. They refuse naturally. Ducks don't particularly enjoy having their freedom traded for scientific ambition. They paddle around the cage with a kind of smug defiance, occasionally dipping their heads just out of reach of the measuring strings, as if mocking the entire endeavor. Despite the setbacks, Shun is undeterred. He scribbles adjustments, adds new pegs, shortens the tethers. He even suggests a two-duck model, thinking that perhaps competition will encourage more movement. You're not convinced. Two ducks in a confined space sounds more like a wrestling match than a weather prediction system. The villagers are entertained, though. They start placing playful bets. If the duck circles 3 times, it'll rain by sunset. If it just sits there, we'll get sunshine. It becomes less about scientific rigor and more about the joy of watching ducks accidentally become the stars of their own stage. The herbalist, still clinging to his belief in duck-enhancing herbs, offers Shun a bundle of fragrant leaves. Sprinkle this near the cage, he advises. It'll make the duck more sensitive to the wind. Shun politely declines. You nearly snort your tea through your nose. Over the next few weeks, Shun's barometer has a handful of minor successes. Some days when the duck's restlessness seems to match the shifting sky, but it never quite lives up to his vision of a reliable instrument. Still, it sparks something in the village. A playful curiosity, a desire to tinker, to find patterns in the randomness. Historians still debate whether Shun's invention contributed to later advancements in animal-based weather forecasting, or if it simply vanished into the folds of forgotten experiments. One thing is certain, the ducks remain unimpressed. You eventually convince Shun to release Ming back into the pond, where he flaps his wings dramatically and gives you what can only be described as a withering glare. You apologize with extra grain that evening, which seems to smooth things over. Life returns to its familiar rhythm. Shun moves on to his next scholarly pursuit, promising to write about the duck barometer in his travel notes. You suspect he'll make the ducks sound far more cooperative than they actually were. The villagers, though, continue their quiet duck observations, now with an extra layer of affectionate teasing. They pretend to consult Ming before deciding whether to bring in laundry. They ask him for planting advice, water levels, even whether the herbalist's love potion will work. The ducks, true to form, offer no answers. They simply exist, paddling and quacking, oblivious to the weight of human expectation. Sometimes, on cool mornings, you find yourself sitting by the pond, reflecting on how this all started. It was never meant to be a grand system, never designed for fame. It was just you watching ducks, trying to make sense of the sky. And now, somehow, you're part of something larger. A story that's traveled beyond your village, that's rippled out like the soft circles left by the ducks' webbed feet. You wonder how many other farmers now watch their ponds, how many children wake early to count the number of head bobs, how many travelers pass along their own versions of the duck signs. You sip your tea and smile. Some things are worth believing in, even if they can't be measured. The seasons slide past, one after another, each bringing new weather, new harvests, and new stories whispered around the village fires. The ducks, your ever-faithful companions, have become a quiet legend, not just here, but far beyond your little pond. One crisp autumn morning, you're stacking bundles of dried rice when a pair of official-looking men in finely embroidered robes arrive. They introduce themselves as envoys from the provincial capital. Their names are June and Lien, and they were the patient but slightly skeptical expressions of men who have heard stories too strange to ignore. You are the one with the weather ducks, June says, his tone a careful balance between curiosity and disbelief. You glance at your flock, currently engaged in a fierce competition over a particularly juicy lotus pod, and nod. I suppose I am. Lien produces a thin scroll, sealed with a ribbon. The governor requests a demonstration. He has heard peculiar things. Ah, the ripple effect. Word travels faster than the rivers when the story is strange enough. Historians still argue whether provincial leaders genuinely took animal-based forecasting seriously or merely saw it as a local novelty to parade before guests. Some accounts suggest that officials were willing to entertain almost any method if it promised to protect their harvest from surprise floods and droughts. You don't get much choice, really. When the governor requests, you go. So, you pack up a small cage, 2 of your calmest ducks, Ming, of course, and a young hen you've taken calling Plum, and set off with June and Lien. The journey is long, and your companions prove surprisingly good-humored. They're intrigued by your stories, asking about the signs, the patterns, and yes, even the duck barometer. You explain the rituals, the days spent quietly observing, the moments when you're sure the ducks knew something you didn't. June seems particularly tickled by the superstition that ducks can sense the intentions of visitors based on whether they waddle towards or away from them. You realize, he chuckles, if they all flee from the governor, this could end badly for you. You laugh along, but you're quietly considering bringing extra grain. When you finally arrive at the governor's estate, it's grand, bigger than you imagined. Courtyards lined with intricate stonework, silken banners fluttering in the breeze, servants bustling like busy ants. And in the middle of this impressive calm, your little bamboo cage and 2 slightly grumpy ducks feel charmingly out of place. The governor, a sharp-eyed man with an elegant beard and an air of practiced patience, greets you with measured politeness. So, he says, you can predict the rain with these? You carefully explain the signs, the ducks' restlessness, the direction they swim, the number of head bobs before sunrise. You mention Lee's shore-clinging theory when seating positions, even shuns ill-fated duck barometer, though you leave out the part where the ducks nearly staged a small revolution. The governor listens, steepling his fingers. Historians still debate whether folk methods hold merit, but I've found that peasants often know their skies better than scholars. You nod, surprised by his openness. He proposes a test. The court astrologers have already predicted 3 days of sun. The governor challenges you to consult your ducks. Tell me if they agree, he says, his smile unreadable. So you set Ming and Plum on the soft grass of the governor's private pond. You watch their every twitch, every ripple they create, every pause in their movement. Plum paddles close to shore, occasionally shaking her wings, a sign you've always trusted. Ming circles restlessly, dipping his beak repeatedly, as though something is coming. You deliver your prediction gently, but with confidence. Rain is likely, despite what the astrologers say. The governor raises an eyebrow, but thanks you politely. He offers you guest quarters while you wait out the 3-day experiment. Those days are tense. Servants pass by, whispering about the strange duck man. The astrologers avoid your gaze. June and Lien, bless them, bring you fresh tea, and try to keep your spirits up. Historians still argue whether this particular incident actually took place, but some records hint at court officials consulting odd folk traditions when desperate for accuracy. On the 3rd evening, as you're walking the gardens, the sky breaks. A soft drizzle first, then a steady, soaking rain. The astrologers' predictions crumble like old parchment. The governor finds you by the pond, watching Plum shake droplets from her feathers. It seems, he says, a rare smile creasing his face, that I owe some thanks to your ducks. He doesn't ask how. He doesn't demand charts or written formulas. He simply accepts it, as though in this vast world, there's room for mysteries that can't be pinned to scrolls. He offers you a modest stipend to stay for a season, to teach the palace staff how to watch the ducks, to incorporate the signs into their routines. You politely decline. Your home, your friends, your pond, that's where you belong. June claps you on the back as you leave. You'll be a legend, he says. You shrug, glancing at Ming and Plum. I think the ducks already are. The journey home is peaceful, the weight of the experience settling gently around you, like morning mist clinging to your sleeves. You realize you've never really needed official approval. The beauty of the duck watcher's tradition is in its quiet, shared curiosity, a bond woven from stories, signs, and the patient art of paying attention. And the ducks? Well, they just keep paddling. When you return to your village, life folds back into its familiar rhythms, like a well-worn cloak settling on your shoulders. The pond greets you with lazy ripples, the ducks with contented quacks, and your friends with wide-eyed curiosity about your brush with the governor's court. Lee listens with great enthusiasm, especially the part about the astrologers being proven wrong. I told you. The ducks know, he says, puffing his chest out as though he personally trained them. One immediately asks whether the governor's pond had the right kind of lilies, convinced that floral proximity influences duck behavior. You can't bring yourself to argue with him. After all, in this village, even half-baked theories are welcome if they're told with enough heart. But something is different now. The villagers look to you with a touch more reverence, as though your years of quiet duck watching have crystallized into something bigger than the sum of lazy afternoons by the water. And you, in turn, feel a subtle shift in yourself. You're still you, but perhaps now you're a custodian of something, a keeper of small, meaningful mysteries. One misty morning, As you sit by the pond with a warm cup of tea, Lee plops down beside you, holding a scrap of paper. "I've been writing a song," he announces, "about the ducks." You raise an eyebrow. "Is it a ballad? A love song?" He shrugs. "Maybe both." He hums a tune that's half forgotten and half made up, a lilting melody about weather and waddles and the wisdom of webbed feet. You can't help but chuckle. Historians still argue whether duck songs have any predictive value. You tease. Lee grins. Maybe they should. The duck tradition spreads, but not because anyone forces it. It spreads because people like the story, like the comfort of believing that nature leaves clues if only you're patient enough to see them. Travelers passing through your village begin asking, almost shyly, if they might sit by the pond for a morning to watch the ducks. Some leave small offerings, bits of grain, polished stones, folded slips of paper with scribbled predictions. You never set yourself up as a teacher, but people naturally drift your way. You show them what you know, how to tell when a duck's restlessness is more than just hunger, how to notice the subtlest shifts in their routine, how to read the pond like a second sky. Sometimes the signs hold true, sometimes they don't. But that's the point, isn't it? The story isn't about perfect accuracy. It's about attention, about noticing, about slowing down enough to see the world through the soft filter of a duck's quiet wisdom. One day, a young girl named May approaches you. She's brought her own little notebook, its pages crammed with her observations. "I think Plum likes to swim in circles before it rains," she says, her voice earnest. You nod, remembering your earliest theories, remembering the thrill of piecing together meaning from the smallest details. "Keep watching," you tell her. "The ducks will tell you more if you're patient." May becomes a fixture by the pond. Her curiosity mirrors your own from years past, and you feel a quiet joy in watching her form her own connections, her own gentle theories. Historians still argue whether these duck-watching villages truly passed their traditions down through generations, or whether the story eventually drifted into obscurity. Some say the practice survived in hidden corners, adapted by each community that embraced it. Others claim it was nothing more than a passing curiosity. But you know better. You've seen the way May's eyes light up when Plum paddles near the reeds. You've heard Lee's song echo across the fields. You've watched travelers, strangers once, sit in silence beside your pond, lulled by the rhythmic splashes and the soft quacking. The ducks, unaware of their fame, simply continue. They swim, they preen, they flap their wings and chase one another in lazy spirals. They carry no burden of their role in your story. They just are. Sometimes when you sit alone at the pond's edge, you think back to that first moment, the day you noticed Ming's odd pacing before the storm. You had no grand plan then, no visions of traditions or tales or courtly tests. You were just watching, just paying attention, and maybe that's all you've ever really needed to do. The village's story, the duck's story, your story, they've all become threads in the same quiet tapestry. A tapestry woven from patience, curiosity, and the soft, steady rhythm of webbed feet on cool water. You finish your tea and rise, stretching as the morning sun casts golden patches across the surface of the pond. Plum paddles closer, her feathers glistening, and you smile at her familiar presence. Lisong drifts from somewhere nearby. May waves at you from across the way, notebook in hand. Life continues in its simple, duck-watching way, and somehow that feels just right. The seasons keep rolling, soft and unhurried, like ripples gliding across the pond's glassy surface. Your days are stitched together by the familiar rhythm, the slow shuffle to the water's edge, the watchful gaze over your feathered companions, the quiet conversations with May and Lee as they offer their latest, sometimes wildly inventive duck-based predictions. Your little community has changed. What began as an odd habit, a personal curiosity, has settled into the very bones of village life. People now consult the ducks before planting their rice, before planning festivals, before choosing the best day to set out on long journeys. And though you always remind them, gently, that the ducks are not magicians nor perfect seers, they come anyway, trusting in the calm, steady dance of nature. Historians still argue whether ancient Chinese farmers genuinely built entire local systems of forecasting around ducks, or whether the tales were embroidered with the soft brushstrokes of time and nostalgia. Some claim the tradition was symbolic, more a ritual than a science. Others insist there must have been a kernel of method among the quacks and ripples. But you've long stopped worrying about who's right. One warm afternoon, as May sits beside you with her growing collection of notes, she asks a question you've secretly waited years to hear. Do you think the ducks actually know? Or do we just like believing they do? You glance at Plum, who's busily inspecting a patch of lily pads, as though they hold the secrets to the universe. Maybe both, you reply, your voice soft. Maybe knowing and believing are sometimes the same thing. May chews on that, scribbling in her notebook. But if the ducks get it wrong, does the story stop working? You shake your head. No, the story was never about perfect predictions. It's about looking closer, about seeing the pond, the weather, the seasons, and yourself with kinder eyes. Lee joins you, dropping to the ground with a cheerful grunt. He's written 3 more verses to his duck song, now an almost mythical ballad sung at village gatherings. It's equal parts epic saga and silly refrain about waddling heroes. He jokes that the ducks should have their own festival, complete with little hats and honorary grain-throwing ceremonies. You pretend to groan at the idea, but you can already imagine it. Children laughing, wooden duck carvings bobbing in the stream, families sharing rice cakes while Plum surveys the crowd like a queen. The ducks, of course, are blissfully unaware of their growing legend. Sometimes, strangers still arrive, hoping to glimpse the magic for themselves. Some leave with notebooks, some with stories, some with quiet, puzzled smiles. They come from cities you've never seen, bearing scrolls, trinkets, and the eternal question, do the ducks really know? You tell them the same thing you've always told everyone. Sit by the pond. Watch. See what they show you. You never promise certainty. You offer only the chance to slow down, to notice the ripples, the shifting breeze, the sun's lazy path across the sky. In time, May becomes the new keeper of the ducks. You pass her your old notes, worn, tea-stained pages filled with scribbles, diagrams, and the occasional doodle of a very round, very unimpressed duck. She takes them with both hands, her eyes shining. You've got the better eye now, you tell her. They trust you. She laughs, but you see the pride in her smile. Historians still argue whether these small, humble stories matter in the grand sweep of history. Whether a farmer's ducks, a village's rituals, and a young girl's notebook deserve to be remembered alongside emperors and battles and grand inventions. But you know the answer. They matter because someone cared enough to notice. And perhaps that's what the ducks have always taught you. Not how to predict the future with flawless precision, but how to live in the present with gentle attention. You spend your days in slower steps now, your joints creaking like old wooden bridges, but your heart is light. The pond still greets you, the ducks still chatter, and the wind still carries the faint, familiar notes of Lee's wandering song. Even when you're gone, the story will linger. In the rustle of the reeds, in the soft wake trailing behind a paddling duck, in the quiet patience passed from watcher to watcher. The world hums on, but here by the pond, time feels as slow and steady as ever. And as you close your eyes, breathing in the earthy scent of water and lotus, you know you've always been exactly where you were meant to be. Let's take a few soft breaths now. Feel the gentle pull of your body sinking into comfort. The story is settled, the pond is still, and the ducks are quietly floating, just as they always have. There's no hurry, no questions left to ask. Just you, the soft ripples, and the warm hush of the evening. You've done enough for today. You can rest now. Sweet dreams.